And a special thanks to Sam Rose and Julie Walters, who made all of this happen this evening, and who've been great friends and great supporters of RARE and our work. I'm really proud to be the recipient of this prize in their name this year, to join Mark Ruffalo, okay? Sorry, I'm not Mark Ruffalo. Lisa Jackson from the EPA, Elizabeth Colbert, James Baylog, and Bill McKibben, real environmental heroes. And I'm really honored to be on that list. What's even better for me is the fact that now my parents will recognize that I actually do have a real job. So thank you, Sam and Julie, for the real job. So tonight I'm going to share with you a few thoughts, some new thinking from RARE, from my colleagues and I, about why the biggest barriers to solving our climate crisis may actually be in our heads. And since we're on a college campus, I'm going to start off tonight with a two-part thesis. First, I believe that we can successfully reduce greenhouse gases and live within our planetary boundaries. And second, the only way we're going to do this is if we can recognize the same illogical, emotional, human mind that created this mess is probably the best tool we have to clean it up. And this is why I'm optimistic. And by the time we're done tonight, I hope you too have at least a little more optimism about our potential to address this big, scary challenge. I argue that just out there on the horizon, there are literally 1 billion opportunities to reduce greenhouse gases, because each one of us represents one of those opportunities. Yes, technology offers many ways to reduce global warming, but technology alone is not going to solve this problem. If we're going to catch this great runaway train that pulled out of the station back at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we're going to need to create a new revolution around human behavior change. We are a big part of the solution. And fortunately, we have a seriously strong track record to build on. That's the good news. It was only 100 years ago that we established officially a national park, eventually the National Park Service, and now there are tens of thousands of protected areas all over the world. 50 years ago, we passed legislation to begin to protect clean air and clean water, and a modern environmental movement was born. It was only a generation ago that we discovered that CFCs were creating a hole in the ozone layer. And because we rallied the planet to make changes in the way we use these chemicals, we're beginning to see the closing of that hole in the ozone. Humans change, society changes, sometimes in some truly phenomenal ways. And I imagine that many of you have some of your own experiences with change. You know it's not easy, but you've done it. So before we dig in too much tonight, I thought it'd be interesting to just play a little game. So bear with me. And probably after dinner, you need a little exercise anyway. So stand up real quick if you're a student here. Wow. Great. Okay, you can have a seat. Thank you. Stand up if you're a professor here or an administrator. Oh, front row seats for the faculty. Well done. Well done. Okay, you guys can have a seat. Thank you. Stand up if you have ever changed your own behavior, and then stay standing. Okay, my work is done. Phenomenal. So who wants to just name one behavior you've changed? Just shout it out. Recycle. I recycle. Okay, what else? Diet. I diet or I dieted, either way. What? You got rid of your car. Okay. Hey. What else? Bravo. What else? On bikes. Working with bikes. Okay, bikes. Promoting. There's a lot of bikes on campus. All right, you guys can sit down. So you have mastered the art of self-change. Okay, last participatory event. Actually, no, there's many more, but you don't have to stand. How many of you have ever changed the behavior of someone else? You know, like roommate that leaves the underwear in the middle of the floor, spouse with the toilet lid, anything. If you've changed someone else's behavior successfully, stand up. All right, slightly smaller group, but still impressive. All right, shout out a few of those. What have you done? Children. You changed your children's behavior. You should win a big prize. Okay. Bravo. What else? I sued the government. Okay. There's an environmentalist in the house. Okay, what else? Made my father stop smoking. Round of applause for that guy. Bravo. All right, so you can all sit down. There's many more stories, though. We'd love to hear them. So we all know getting our father to quit smoking, among other changes, is really hard. It's just about the hardest thing that we do. We're humans, and change isn't easy. Climate change somehow feels especially difficult. Somehow, we know it's very difficult. There are people literally dying now as a result of climate change. There are wars being fought over climate change. Species are going extinct as a result of climate change. Climate change is fast becoming the greatest threat humanity has ever faced. I see it like this, hurtling towards us like a meteor, that famous meteor 65 million years ago, that eventually sent ash after impact all throughout North America, killing everything for thousands of miles within its range. And then we all know that ash moved up into the atmosphere, circulated the planet for years, and arguably cooled the planet, killing the dinosaurs and sending Earth into a new geological epoch. So look in the mirror. You and I are that meteor. That is what we are doing to the planet. We are wiping out species at 100 to 1,000 times their natural rate of extinction. Of course, instead of cooling the planet, we're warming the planet. But we're doing so much damage, we're leaving such a footprint. Maybe fingerprints would be a better analogy. That if there's any thoughtful life on Earth millions of years from now, they'll be able to look back, they'll be able to see our mark, and they will call it the mother of all crime scenes. They're even coming up with a name for it, geologists. They call it the Anthropocene, which means the era, the epoch of man. That's the bad news. What gives me hope is that there are many powerful examples in our history, in our past, times when against all odds, we literally changed our social norms. We established new moral high ground, and we literally changed the way we behave, the way we interact, the way we talk. Abolishing slavery 150 years ago is a pretty good example for America. It took a long time, unforgivably so. The push for women's suffrage, at least for some women 100 years ago, gave some women the right to vote by changing the Constitution. Imagine that. And it was only a few years ago that a majority of Americans and the Supreme Court officially embraced the idea that people should be able to marry the person they love. This acceptance was unthinkable a generation ago. Absolutely unthinkable. What's acceptable changes. What we consider just evolves. How we inhabit this earth is to be determined. But major change is needed, and it's possible. At RARE, the organization that I'm lucky enough to lead, we believe the solution lies in our heads. Humans have an incredible ability to adapt, to cooperate, to evolve. We are survivors above all else. And the same minds that created climate change will eventually fix it. I truly believe that. I know some of you don't. So over the past 6 months, we've been developing a new idea, a global partnership to take the insights about human behavior and begin addressing the most pressing environmental challenges, including climate change. Because we believe climate change desperately needs behavior change. Okay, but before we really dig in, before I tell you more about this new idea, I want to tell you a little bit about how I got here and how this $100,000 prize actually led to creating this new center. So let me start with my own story, because a number of the students have been asking me, so what's your deal? How did you get here? Why are you standing in front of us today? And I want to start with my midlife crisis at age 24. So I was working 15 hours a day, sometimes more, 6, usually 7 days a week. I was making TV commercials for Dunkin' Donuts, American Express, Blue Cross, Blue Shield. I was a journalist. I had been a journalist. And I thought I was writing scripts on the side. I was pretty sure that someday I was going to be a famous writer, the great American novel, or maybe a famous film director, maybe even Mark Ruffalo. I had been working without a break for 16 or 17 days for the third or fourth time in a row. I was completely wiped out, completely burnt out. I was 24 years old. We had a big wrap party. That's the big party you have at the end of a big shoot. And let's just say I had a little more than a little bit to drink. So I woke up the next morning with a monumental hangover. I'm sorry, but I'm just going to be honest. And this was literally on my wall. I had no idea how it got there. Apparently, I had written it because that's my handwriting. Now, I know what you're thinking. The guy has a hangover and he calls it a midlife crisis. That's pathetic, okay? But let me just say, this was a really bad hangover. This was the kind where you literally can't move for fear that your head will break. So all I could do was sort of blink up at that writing on the wall, not just proverbially. So I got out of the film business. I grabbed my favorite man bag and I moved to Costa Rica. I moved to Costa Rica and you're all jealous of that bag, aren't you? I know you are. I moved to Costa Rica and I became a volunteer English teacher in a rural school. I literally paid $5,000 so that I could be a volunteer in a rural school, anything to get out of the film business. But it turns out teaching 5th and 6th graders in rural Costa Rica is actually harder than making a Dunkin' Donuts commercial. I kid you not. But having a real purpose made me feel pretty rich. The unhappy filmmaker became a joyful volunteer. And it was a pretty fascinating time in Costa Rica. The country was fast becoming the ecotourism capital of the world. And at one point, an environmental group that I'd never heard of, they had about 4 staff at the time, 2 of them walked into my office, and they said, hey, would you help us train local farmers and local fishermen to become English-speaking nature guides? I was an English teacher. We were training 50 teachers in 100 schools, thousands of kids. And even though I had a full-time job running that program, I said yes, and I took on a second full-time job, equally low, no pay. Hardest job I've ever had, most fulfilling time of my entire life. Working now way more hours than I was working in the commercial film business, making way less money. So we built a program to turn local fishers and local farmers and even construction workers into English-speaking nature guides so that they could participate in this burgeoning ecotourism industry. We taught them natural history, taught them how to identify all the local birds and mammals, and even to begin to be storytellers, how to tell a story that would captivate a tourist, from Baltimore, to learn where the Baltimore Oriole was actually during the whole winter. What I didn't realize at the time, as we took this program, replicated it 15 or 16 times, took it to Honduras, to Mexico, eventually even to South Africa, was that we were learning how to change human behavior. We were helping people change jobs. We were helping people move from poaching to conservation. So literally, turtle poachers became nature guides. Illegal loggers started small eco-huts. Conservation groups were now able to show up in these communities with local people willing to not just partake, but to help lead the way to promote environmental protection. Because they knew their economy now depended on it, and they were skilled participants. In the local communities, these guides, literally, we watched, begin to make changes in social norms. So you'd see teenage boys and girls wearing binoculars with bird guides, learning the birds of Costa Rica, learning the mammals, beginning to ask themselves, so what do I need to do to be an apprentice? I want to be a guide too. These were now the hero jobs in rural Costa Rica. And so if we, these volunteers at 24, 25, 26, could really begin to influence the trajectory of an economy in a country, well, we all clearly have something significant we can contribute to these challenges. So needless to say, I fell in love with conservation and with community development, and this little organization that I'd never heard of called RARE sort of became a passion. What I loved about RARE and what I continue to love about this organization, and I've been with it most of my adult life now, so this is really home, is that RARE didn't just tell people to stop poaching. It didn't just say, create a national park, fix your problems. RARE was about meeting people where they are, respecting them, engaging them, helping them make change in their own way to benefit themselves. So it's fitting that all these years later we have a logo, one of the few organizations in the environmental field with a human in the logo. We think conservation, like climate change, is all about people. And so let me share with you the first story that really made me fall in love with RARE. And this is sort of the oldie but the goodie, kind of like the founding story. I'm going to take you back to the Caribbean, St. Lucia. This is the early 1980s. And in the early 1980s, there was this incredible bird, the St. Lucian parrot, Amazona versicolor. And it was found nowhere else on Earth, endemic just to St. Lucia. The World Wildlife Fund and the IUCN came out with a report that said, this bird will not escape oblivion by the year 2000. This was the projected trajectory. It was going to go extinct. The St. Lucian Forestry Department, though, took a chance on a 23-year-old kid, sound familiar to some of you, who wrote a senior paper saying, we can save the St. Lucian parrot. He had visited the country on a 2-week trip, and he said, we need a park, we need to protect the bird, we need to put in jail anyone caught with this bird. Anybody you could sell these on the black market for a couple $1,000s. And so in their infinite wisdom, and maybe because he only charged them a couple $100 a month, they hired that guy behind the St. Lucia sign, my friend Paul Butler. Paul showed up in Costa Rica, no experience, wide-eyed, naive, open-minded, but he asked himself, how can we get people's attention? Because he realized day one, actually no one had ever heard of this bird. Only the ornithologists knew anything about it. And so he said, how do we get people's attention? How do we sell products when it says on the label, it will kill you? How do we sell things that smell funny and that we lather all over our bodies that come from whale blubber, right, or other things? We don't even know where these things come from, but we put them all over us every day. That's great marketing. So can we borrow from those marketing practices? And so with virtually no budget, he launched a campaign that built on local St. Lucian pride. St. Lucia had been traded back and forth between the French and the English for decades. They had just become independent, and so he tapped into that patriotism, that pride. He built this really kitschy mascot, the $5 version of the mascot. You'd never root for a team that had that mascot, right? That's pathetic. However, it was homegrown. It was a symbol of their country. They wrote a song, Amazona versicolor. It's the anthem of the environment in St. Lucia. Amazona versicolor. My staff asks me all the time, never sing this song. The national bird of St. Lucia. You can walk into the customs office as a tourist tomorrow and start singing that song, and somebody in their 40s or their 50s, if you ask them, they'll say, yeah, man, I know what that song is. That's the song from Jacot the bird. That's our national bird. Because this unknown bird eventually got a tour bus on an island that's 16 miles wide with one traffic light in those days. Eventually they held a referendum. It became the national symbol on the passport. Once considered a lost cause for an idealistic young conservationist, we now know the parrot population to be over 1,800. Without the first Pride campaign, this bird would be extinct. And this is one of those little stories of hope. So when I joined RARE, fascinated by this story and all the things that we had seen working on ecotourism and community development, I made it my mission to clone Paul Butler, to travel like Johnny Appleseed, following Paul and helping make sure that we could run hundreds of these to save species, to create parks, to pass legislation. And that's what we've been doing for over 20 years all over the world. 50 plus countries and counting. I'm sure this is out of date. We're probably up to 400 now, and the number is increasing significantly. So The point was we were beginning to learn how to change behavior, how to replicate behavior change in order to advance environmental protection. So we're really proud of the impact we're making. I'm proud to work for RARE. Our board, our donors, our staff, they feel really great about the organization. But we all know when we take a deep breath before you put your pillow on the head at night, there is so much more that we need to do. And there's so much more that we've been given the gift to be able to do. So it's a duty, it's a calling. Just how much more? Well, the trend lines are pretty scary. So these are 250-year trend lines. For population, you can see on the left, ramped up significantly over the last 100 years. But by any of these measures, you would say, wow, this species is incredibly successful. But it's come, our success, at an unforgivable cost. We're literally driving these resources, the ones that we evolved from, the ones that we depend on, the ones that our culture depends on. We're driving them to a point of surpassing our planetary limits. There's a direct correlation. Real GDP, population, carbon dioxide. Those are the facts. We are causing this problem, let there be no doubt. So we are the only thing that can solve this problem. Humans are arguably the most successful species ever to inhabit the planet. There's some microbiologists that might disagree, parasitologists, virologists, I think, who might disagree, but I would argue humans are pretty successful. We were once hunters and gatherers. We learned language, we started societies, we planted crops, we built towns. The water wasn't always in the right place, so we learned irrigation. Our settlements started to smell, so we invented sewage. The problem is that our technology, our creativity, has accelerated so quickly that it's outpaced, in many ways, our ability to manage it, our ability to govern ourselves. That's the challenge we face environmentally right now. An astrobiologist named David Grinspoon has a great analogy for this. He says, you know, we're like a small child noticing for the first time our hands and the power that those hands wield. We play war games while sitting on stockpiles of nuclear weapons. Thanks to bioengineering, we're beginning to manage our own genetic evolution. We reshape rivers and we create robots that make our shoes. In many ways, evolution, our own, and the evolution of the planet and the systems that we depend upon are now in our hands. But we're nowhere near ready for this power. The fact is, we're making a pretty big mess of things, right? And we have a lot of growing up to do. So though we're called Homo sapiens, we're not actually very wise. We're hardwired to make climate change a really difficult challenge because we don't do long-term planning very well. We're emotional, we're tribal, we're illogical. So it seems more important now than ever that we really begin to think about what it is that makes us tick. Because as it turns out, Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize on Monday, has taught us, we're actually really illogical in some highly predictable ways. And therein lies a really big opportunity. So let me give you an example of just how predictable we are. So now I want to begin to talk about these behavioral insights, learning about ourselves, so that we can get to actually solving this problem. So, quick question, especially for the students. I think you're in midterms. The new president, has given me the power tonight to offer you a deal. Anybody who has an exam tomorrow, if you pay me $20 right now, you got to raise your hand, I will give you the right to postpone your test 24 hours. How many of you want to pay $20 to postpone your exam until tomorrow? Really? Okay, I'm going to lower the price. How many of you would pay $5 to delay your homework assignments for 24 hours? Okay, now we're getting there. $5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's a very scientific survey. 25. Okay. So $5, I guess, we have a willingness to pay. That's an official survey. How many of you now, let's say your final exam is December 10th. How many of you would pay $5 right now to delay your exam on December 10th, 24 hours? 1. Are you an economist? Okay. He's an econ student. So why are 25 students willing to pay the same amount of money for the same value right now, 25 times the respondents, let's just say. Let's say we're trying to make a bigger deal out of this. Okay, so the deal is, that's called, to scientists, hyperbolic discounting. But forget the fancy name. What it means is we heavily discount the future. That's a problem for climate change, don't you think? We discount the future just about every day. So keep that in the back of your mind. That might be something we can use. Risk perception is another challenge. Global warming is precisely the kind of challenge where, well, it's long-term. It may not get to us very soon. But this is a study by the Yale Climate Communications Center. And this helps you visualize. Don't worry about reading it. On the left, what it tells you is, in the summary, most people think climate change will harm Americans. Most Americans think that. But they don't think it will happen to them. So on the left, what they visualized here is the fact that 50, 60, 70% of Americans believe climate change will affect Americans. But less than 30% think it's actually going to impact them. So that makes it kind of a challenge, even when you say, hey, 80 years from now, sea level rise might bring 6 feet higher the level of water in the Hudson River. And New Yorkers will probably, because of this phenomenon, discount that future. So that's one example. Here's another example. Classic. How many of you students, or how many of your professors can corroborate this? Walk into class the first day of the term, sit in a seat, and then go back every day habitually to that same seat. Raise your hand. Just be honest. Come on. All right. Everybody. Okay. Just about everybody. So why do we do that? Literally, why do we do that? So somebody came up with a really brilliant name called the status quo bias. We don't like change. We like sitting in the same seat every morning when we go to that class. That actually gives us a couple of insights into just how difficult change is. We like to keep things the same. So a ramification of this is one of my last offers of the night, and you got to get it while the going is good. Raise your hand if you want a free trip to Hawaii on Hawaiian Airlines for spring break. Okay, now pause. How many of you in the last 5 seconds already decided how you were going to offset your carbon emissions on that free vacation to Hawaii? All right, good. They're very honest. They're very honest. So nobody. And yet we know we have to figure out how to trade carbon if we're going to fix some of these challenges. So this status quo locks us into a certain way of thinking about a free vacation to Hawaii, not what does it look like at 4 o'clock this past Sunday when you look at an app that shows you every commercial flight in North America. That's one picture at 4 p.m. on Sunday from my wife's iPhone. That's what's actually happening with air travel around the country. All right, next behavioral insight. You have all experienced this cartoon. So I've heard the rhetoric from both sides. It's time to do my own research. I want to find the real truth. You do the Google search, and you immediately click on that one link that says exactly what you want it to say. Jackpot. And yet, in our minds, certainly I am objective, but I pretty much assume all of you are very subjective. This is called the confirmation bias. We look for any data that will confirm our belief before we begin. And so this represents a challenge. This is why some conservative media outlets might only talk about climate change in the winter, during a blizzard, when it seems like an opportune time to confirm a particular bias. So the challenge is we have one mind, and we can't just blame away climate change. We can't complain away climate change. We can't hope away climate change. We're going to have to learn some kind of psychological judo to take what makes us tick and make it useful for climate change. But the good news is that some of these examples that I just mentioned are really helping us, and there's a litany of others, begin to figure out how to be better marketers, how to sell better products, how to address public health concerns. And the problem is many of these haven't really been brought to the environmental field yet, and that's the big opportunity. That's the big opportunity that we're beginning to explore. What's exciting is you don't actually have to be a rocket scientist, you don't have to be a behavioral scientist to begin to pick up one of these books at your airport as you're traveling around, putting emissions out there into the atmosphere, so that you can better understand behavior change, the basic concepts. My wife wanted to point out that apparently fresh breath is also really important for your library, as you can see there. Some of you are going to say this is really silly. Behavior change, come on. There's so many bigger issues that we need to address. You know, why don't we just make some changes in Washington? Why don't we just promote solar or nuclear? Or why don't we promote electric cars? Technology, renewables, that's what's going to get us there. Yes, those will all help, all of those things. But those alone are not going to get us there. We need multiple solutions, and we need many different kinds of people working on them. There's a new book that I really love out by Paul Hawken. It's called Drawdown. And Paul Hawken and a whole group of researchers put together the top 100 solutions to climate change. And these top 100 solutions and the way they're organized really personally gives me a lot of hope that there's some more creative thinking going on about how we can reduce global warming. And some of their conclusions are actually unexpected. So quick quiz. Which of these three has the greatest potential to reduce greenhouse gases? Educating young girls, selling electric vehicles, or promoting vegetarianism? A. Actually, A comes in second. C comes in first. What's fascinating, and we'll get into some of these specifics, but the fact is nobody picked electric cars, and yet think about how much more press they get. We're fascinated by the concept of the electric guitar. And, okay, now you know who I really am. So we're fascinated by these new technologies, but there's so many other opportunities for meaningful change, and that makes it easier for those of us who are not designing batteries to contribute. So they've broken down, these researchers have broken down these 100 solutions into 7 big categories. What I find interesting about this, I'm not sure, I think we made this, I'm not sure, extrapolating from their work. I'm not sure this is in the book, but what this shows is if you aggregate empowering women and educating girls and promoting family planning, that's women and girls. If you add food, fixing the food system and making it more sustainable, if you add land use restoration, land use reforms, you can pretty quickly get to 50, 60% of the solution without the stuff that we always talk about: energy, cities, transportation, and materials. This should give us hope as individuals for the difference we can begin to make. So here's just an assortment of the top 20. And I actually thought these were really interesting, given that I visited the Dickinson farm on Monday, and I think it's Jen and Matt, and they gave me their team gave me a great tour out there. And what I realized is you guys on the campus at Dickinson are already working on a number of these things: reducing food waste, developing a plant-rich diet. That's that vegetarian element. But that's a better way to present it. You don't have to just forget everything that you love, like bacon. But a plant-rich diet means you're moving in the right direction. They're also doing silvopasture, one of the first projects I've seen in silvopasture, which basically means planting trees in the field, which does multiple things, including giving a little shade to the cattle. Regenerative ag, conservation ag, land use. These are some of the things that just with our purchasing power, we can begin to move the needle on. So let's move to the main argument here, and then we can wrap up and everyone can get back to social media and all the bad news you're going to face when you get home tonight. Principles of behavioral design. So as I mentioned, we've started a partnership with some of the leading research institutions around the planet. And we're starting to think about what are these principles? What are these myriad insights? Emotional appeals, social incentives, choice architecture. How do we categorize them? How do we organize them? And how do we share them? We have graphic designers, we have interior designers, we have urban designers. Why can't we have behavior designers? And why can't we train a legion of behavior designers to help us behave better as stewards of this planet? So here's what we're beginning to learn. Emotions are incredibly powerful. We know that. Rare knows that through and through because we've been working on pride in multiple countries all over the world. We also know that there are a number of really interesting insights that we might have been applying without knowing that there was a science behind them. Here's one of my favorites. I hadn't really heard of this until a few weeks ago. Anybody know what the IKEA effect is? Okay. Is it because your husband, if you have a husband, went out and about a week before you gave birth, bought a crib at IKEA, came home, built the crib, doubling the value of the crib because now it's not just 50 bolts and 6 slabs of wood, and then literally compared the effort of building the crib with the effort of actually giving birth. That is a great example of the IKEA effect. And the notion is we love what we ourselves build, right? We all have built stuff that we know no one else needed or liked, but we are so proud of our construction. So this little theory, this little insight, is something we've long utilized at Rare because we don't walk into a community and say, hey, your fisheries are overfished. Why don't you get at that? Go fix that. Instead, we work with them. Here's a community designing a way to save its coral reefs and its mangroves, protect its fisheries, and ensure they can feed themselves in the decades to come. So we don't just involve the communities, we help them co-create the solutions. So the second big category of all these insights is, there's only 3 of these, so don't worry. People are very social animals, right? Incredibly social. In some ways, it's fair to say that we care way more about what other people think of us than just about anything else. And partly that's how we've survived. Partly that's how we've succeeded as a species. But it also makes us kind of ridiculous at times. Let me give you an example. Do you remember this ad? Anybody remember this ad? So this was an Apple Macintosh ad. And if you sort of think about it, you can see what's at work here. A computer was never shown in this ad. There's no computer in the ad. There's just 2 guys, right? One, played by Justin Long, the guy on the right. He's the cool guy. He's got his hoodie on. He is, he's just your average cool guy. He makes his own beer. He's super interesting. The guy on the left is the PC guy. And the PC guy is not so cool. He's played by the comedian John Hodgman. He's especially uncool, but not in a cool, uncool way. He's just not cool. Apple assumed that you would pick your computer, we would pick our computer based on who we wanted to be like. Turned out to be a very successful ad campaign. So what do scientists call this? The bandwagon effect. Super original, pretty clear name. Because we want to belong. This theory basically says we conform. We go along with the group. We assume it's right if many people are involved. That's just how we roll as a species. This is one of the cornerstones of the work that we do. And so here what you'll see is a campaign, a pride campaign. We've successfully cloned Paul Butler in Valle de Cauca in western Colombia, right? And they're building pride in protecting local watersheds. We literally create bandwagons, but we never knew there was a science behind this. For us, it was a parade. This isn't about Rare. This is just our starting point. We're just getting going on this. But to illustrate it, these insights about social incentives are really some of the most powerful ones. Because we're not homo economicus. We don't just make rational decisions based on how it's going to best benefit us in the short term economically. Often we make really irrational decisions based on what we think other people are going to nod in approval at. So, last one, choice architecture. For me, this is kind of a mouthful. I think we're going to work on this name, but this is what Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler in Nudge coined as the notion is sometimes the way you make decisions, sometimes the pathway to decision making is even more important than the decisions themselves. Recycling is a really good example because when I was a little kid in my town, you had to take recycling if you wanted to the municipal dump. Now, many of you are just accustomed to having, we learned, municipal haulers learned, boy, it'd be a lot easier if you just bring them a bin, we fill it up, they take it away from our curbside, easy. So recycling improved. How many of you have been to Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam? Okay. How many of you have been in the men's room at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam? President Ensign says, no, I have not. So, as is widely known, Dutch men only aren't really known for accuracy or focus, let's just say. American men, we don't have this problem, of course. So, to improve their aim, Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam had these little stencils put into all the urinals. So nobody had to change behavior. They just induced what's called the target practice effect. Forgive me, President Ensign. But this is a great example of choice architecture and one of my favorites. You don't have to think. Behavior just changes, and it has. All right, let's apply that to climate change, though. Here's a brand new financial services company in China. It's called Ant Financial. Fast-growing company, 450 million users. 200 million of them have already elected an opportunity to offset their carbon emissions. They've already planted in 9 months, this has only been going on for 9 months, 1 million trees in Inner Mongolia, which is they need more trees in Inner Mongolia, as many of you know. So it's a great example of just an app. Choice architecture and apps are going to go hand in hand, obviously, they already do. So there are some real opportunities in leveraging these insights, and we have really only been at this really for a few months. I'm not a behavioral economist. I'm not a social psychologist. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I'm not a neuroscientist. And I don't play any of those on TV. But RARE is just getting going. We're just beginning to learn about those sciences. But we have a plan. So here's what we're going to do. Thanks to Sam and Julie, we're going to operationalize this concept. We're going to do 3 things. First, we're going to gather up a whole bunch of these insights. So there are already over 160. There's so many that you put them on a slide, you can't even see them. But if you looked really closely, you'd see IKEA effect there. You'd see, you'd see status quo bias. You'd see a number of these, in fact, all of these. But there are hundreds of others. And so we're going to collect them. And in addition to young people learning, young conservation leaders learning about this, many folks now are learning these and they're going off to Apple and Google and Facebook and applying them so that they can maximize how many pairs of shoes we buy. They can maximize how effective their advertising is. We think the brilliant minds behind these insights can be put to, let's just say, more noble purposes, especially addressing climate change. Not that you all shouldn't be also working at Facebook and Google and et cetera. But few of these insights have been applied to conservation. So while we're creating this taxonomy of insights, we're going to also organize a whole list, including those from Drawdown, of things that are highly necessary. Let's just say critical priorities for behavior change to advance conservation. And then we're going to share these insights with people far and wide. Our goal is to train in the next 5 years 2,500 conservation leaders to be able to take these insights and change tens of millions of behaviors out there all over the world as a down payment on the kind of global change that we need. And it's starting actually tomorrow here at Dickinson, where about 25 students are going to get together and we're going to pilot test a training course where we bring together students and faculty, behavioral insights, design thinking to work on solving an actual problem. Next month we'll do the same thing at Stanford, and then we'll continue to hone this craft, and eventually we'll actually have something that will be ready to be shared far and wide. And so thank you to Dickinson for helping us put that together. As I mentioned, though, and as we move towards a closing here, I want to thank Sam and Julie because they've been nagging me, literally, for 3 solid years. Okay, we're saving the ocean, we're fixing fisheries. What about climate change? How are we going to address climate change? And RARE's not the only organization, thank goodness, that's really beginning to invest in addressing climate change. In fact, I would say thoughtfully that we're a laggard. There are many groups that have paved the way, that have led this charge. But we feel we have something unique to offer, and we're excited just to be able to do that. So thank you, Sam and Julie, for giving us the proverbial nudge to get this going. Okay, let's wrap this up. So tonight I would hope that I've impressed upon you 2 principal things. First, we can reduce greenhouse gases, and we can live within our planetary boundaries. And second, that the same emotional, illogical, tribal mind that created this mess can help us to clean it up. And since this is my first speech on a college campus in quite a long time, President Ensign has allowed me to give you all 1 homework assignment. So thank you, Madam President. Here it is. I hope you're ready for it. After you go home tonight, after you've had a drink, or after you've done your homework, or after you've had a proper supper, you're going to go home, you're going to get in bed, and like most people, you're going to turn on that phone. You're going to turn on your iPad, and you're going to ruin your day by reading the news. And so my request of you tonight is to avoid your confirmation bias, to begin to make the change and not fall prey to reading all the bad news that unsettles your sleep for the evening. And instead, I want to challenge you tonight and in the nights to come to try to look beyond your current news feed and find not just the forest fires, not just the toll they're taking on California right now, not the map of the trajectory of all those hurricanes through the Caribbean this fall, and not the gunshots ringing out, but to think about all the good news that is actually happening and all those bright spots, those hope spots happening all over the world. And so if you don't believe me, I just pulled these up just in about 20 minutes search. EasyJet is trying to figure out in the next 10 years how to have a commercial airline that can fly on electric power. Organic farming is statistically rising at a very significant rate. The world population growth rate is in steep decline. It doesn't mean the problem's over, but it doesn't mean we need to be wringing our hands every day and blaming everything on something we can't control ourselves, unless we're of reproductive age and using family planning. India has determined that it's only going to sell electric cars by 2030. McDonald's is actually now selling sustainable coffee and organic tea starting quite soon. Solar is crushing coal. We all know that. That's not a soundbite. That's the reality. Vegans, vegetarians are beginning to take over certain markets. Just check and reflect on what's happening in your supermarket right now or at tonight's dinner. The ozone hole is finally projected to close up. By 2050, we will very likely have solved a big, hairy, challenging problem that we didn't think we could, because it was up there in the stratosphere. We didn't quite get to 1.5. We got, though, 190 countries to agree to a temperature setting for the planet. My wife and I can't even agree on the thermostat setting in our house, and we got 190 countries to agree. We got 160 plus to ratify. They're on board, no matter what currently happens with this administration. That is movement, that is progress, that was unthinkable. That was unthinkable 2 years before Paris. Global carbon emissions stood still in 2016, meaning they didn't increase, despite economic growth. We always assume per dollar is greenhouse gases, right? They might have separated for the first time in 2016, those two curves. That should give us hope. I have a lot of hope. I believe that what's in between our 2 ears lies the solution to the climate change problem. And we really look forward to working with Dickinson, your professors, your alumni, and your current students to begin to work together to solve this challenge. Thank you so much for this prize, and thank you for listening tonight.